College Writing 1 Oral Report by Michael Chiango. To be presented November 16th, 2020. Christianity and the American Patriarchy. When I was trying to think of a topic to write about for my proposal paper, I wanted it to be something that I cared about and that I thought would provide legitimate value to people who would read my final paper in opening up their eyes to connections and conclusions about something they might not have considered before. To be honest, that's what I try to do with all my writings and projects. I'm not just trying to pass a class. I'm always trying to put as much effort as I can into making a legitimately good product that people can take something away from. In terms of opening people up to things they might not have considered before, the topic that immediately came to my mind was religion. As I outlined originally in my nonfiction memoir assignment, my deconversion experience from Christianity served as a catalyst for me rethinking a lot of things that I used to assume about the world at large. And so although I'm not religious anymore, religion is still a very important and interesting subject for me that I knew I would have something to write about for this semester. For my original proposal, I needed to narrow down my focus from just writing about religion in general to finding some specific aspect that I would research and examine. I wanted to focus specifically on religion's influence on human behavior and human values, and while scrolling around on YouTube, I came across a video that has since been deleted titled Identifying and Overcoming All Forms of Sexual Immorality from a now-deleted channel called Unworthy Servant Malachi. The video was incredibly disturbing as it portrayed all forms of sexual pleasure outside of unprotected vaginal intercourse within the confines of marriage when a woman is not on her period as inherently sinful and disordered, and even made the claim that wet dreams are the result of demons possessing you in your sleep. What was perhaps even more disturbing was the comments section, which was full of people, many of them young teenagers, lamenting about how dirty and sinful they were simply for having natural sexual desires and expressions. The views expressed in the video were certainly more extreme and uncompromising than most modern Christian teachings in the United States would be. However, in the video, scriptural evidence and passages were used to defend every single point that was made, and disregarding the harsh language, much of the rhetoric in the video sounded very similar to what I had experienced in my Catholic upbringing. In fact, when I look back at my Catholic instructions throughout all of my senior year of high school, there seemed to be a continuously unhealthy obsession in religious classes with trying to dictate human sexuality and enforce gender roles far more than actually following the teachings of love, compassion, and humility passed down by Christ. The idea for my proposal then came to me. I was going to write about how the Abrahamic religions, mainly Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, affect societal attitudes towards sex and gender. My thesis for the proposal was, regardless of which interpretation is endorsed by its adherents, however, there is a fundamental aspect of authoritarian control over private sexual activities that are utterly endemic in the Abrahamic faiths that produce a deeply corrosive effect on society, manifesting itself in everything from misogyny towards women to marginalization of deviant sexual orientations to purity culture and internalized shame. Although this was my proposal for what I would discuss in my later writings, I came to realize fairly quickly that I would have far too difficult a time trying to write a succinct and well-researched paper about such a broad and far-reaching concept as the Abrahamic religion effects on societal attitudes towards sex and gender. Instead, I would have to narrow down my topic once again, and while going through some more research, I came across an incredibly interesting article that caught my attention, which pointed out how in many ancient creation myths, the creator, whether the creator of the universe or life or the earth, is often portrayed as a female, with her giving birth to creation in a metaphorical sense. However, by contrast, texts of the Abrahamic religions depict God, the creator of everything, in exclusively male terms. This got me thinking about how the very nature of the deity portrayed in the Abrahamic faiths had so much to say about the effect those faiths have on society's conceptions of gender and gender roles. I decided to rework my topic to move away from the Abrahamic religion's effects on societal values about sex and instead focused on their effect on societal values about gender and how they promote gender conformity as I researched sources to analyze from my annotated bibliography. This paper went into far deeper and more nuanced levels of analysis on my subject than my proposal did, and I also used the third source of the paper in order to look at how a person's perspective on gender and gender roles are impacted once they distance themselves from any ties to the Abrahamic religions. The reason that I did that is because I felt it was proper to address common claims made against atheists that they are blatant sexists and misogynists due to anti-feminist attitudes held by some online atheist activists. The thesis for the paper was thus: as the annotated articles below will show, forms of adherence and interpretations of sacred texts can often lead to traditionalist ideas about gender roles in society, but that is not always the case, and those who do not hold to any particular religion do not always devote themselves to the cause of gender equality. After writing my annotated bibliography paper, I could not shake the feeling of being overwhelmed with my future draft that I would have to write for my final paper. My topic of analyzing the Abrahamic religion's effect on societal values on gender and gender norms still felt like too broad a concept for me to base a succinct and focused paper on. I felt as though, even if I did end up writing my paper, it would not nearly be as all-encompassing as I would like, and would only be able to analyze specific examples and data relating to my point, as took place in my annotated bibliography. There was simply no way I would have the time, or the research skills, or the paper length, for that matter, to write a compelling final paper on the topic I had selected for myself. So I knew that I would have to narrow down my focus once again, this time disregarding Abrahamic faiths other than Christianity and focusing only on its effect, past and present, on values and gender norms in the British colonies and the United States of America. This would not only serve to narrow down my topic to make it easier to write about, but would also play better to my far greater knowledge of my own country that I was raised and educated in, and the religion I had far greater experiences with, as opposed to other regions and religious practices that I had far less information or access to research about. I also thought that it would make for a far more important and topical paper for anyone who might read it, as they would almost certainly be living in the United States and would very likely be coming from a Christian background as well, which would make the paper much closer to home for its audience, and hopefully afford them a greater perspective on the history and importance of Christianity, gender, and patriarchy throughout the United States' history. As for the presentation of this video, the draft for the final paper has not yet been completed, but the thesis for the rough draft is as such. With the religion of Christianity being so formative to America's identity as a nation, quote-unquote, under God, if Americans are truly to say that they now value gender equality, Christianity and its patriarchal values that many modern traditionalists continue to espouse must be examined with a critical eye and judged as to the role it has played in shaping society's attitude towards gender in the past and still shapes society's attitude towards gender today. For my final draft of my paper, I plan to follow my introduction to my topic with, first, an explanation and analysis of the historical view of women's established roles in American society, second, an analysis of the contradictory nature between biblical teachings and the so-called traditional norms and values regarding gender in America, third, the societal implications that can be gleaned from adhering to the implied and expressed messages about gender and gender roles gained from the Bible, fourth, an analysis of the American feminist movements campaigning for civil rights in the country and how Christianity fit into that. Fifth, a look into non-biblical forms of sexism in the country and how a lack of religion can impact values about gender and gender norms. And finally, a reflection on how the United States is to uphold and strengthen the values of egalitarianism and gender equality as a nation with Christianity as its most influential and powerful religion since its founding. I sincerely hope that when my final draft is completed, it is a stimulating and informative piece that's ideas will be of great value to anyone willing to read it.